In this video, I kind of like to talk about freedom and kind of what it means today, and I guess what's the most important kind of freedom, or what is freedom really, I guess. Well, I guess freedom is kind of a term that's been very abused, particularly in the political circle, where it's kind of being exclusive to the United States or Western Europe or many of these other countries, and another thing about freedom today is it's a very materialistic concept. The only thing people really care about freedom is whether you can marry a certain person or you can drink a certain beverage or whatever kind of laws people are debating about. It seems people really never talk about freedom of, say, their minds or even freedom to pursue education or um, perhaps even just to freedom to think to yourself or not be constrained by things that are really the real impediment to freedom. And I guess what I want to talk about too is how Islam would actually help with this concept. To many, it seems completely contradictory. In fact, how can a religion which establishes absolute rules and regulations actually support freedom? Uh, I'd like to ask C.S. Lewis and see what he says about freedom.
There is a story about a schoolboy who was asked what he thought God was like. He replied that as far as he could make out, God was the sort of person who is always snooping round to see if anyone is enjoying himself and then trying to stop it. And I am afraid that is the sort of idea that the word morality raises in a good many people's minds. Something that interferes, something that stops you having a good time. In reality, moral rules are directions for running the human machine. Every moral rule is there to prevent a breakdown or a strain or a friction in the running of that machine. That is why these rules at first seem to be constantly interfering with our natural inclinations. When you are being taught how to use any machine, the instructor keeps on saying, "No, don't do it like that." Because, of course, there are all sorts of things that look all right and seem to you the natural way of treating the machine, but do not really work.
So thus we've seen a little bit of a perspective where it says that rules can actually be helpful to the individual human being, not necessarily constrict them, but to unlock certain potentials that may be within the human being that otherwise we ourselves would never have been able to have figured out. And it seems that these rules and regulations actually bring about the condition to unlock the human spirit and allow to remove the shackles of, say, idols or wrong ways of thinking, and to allow the person to stay within a frame where they're able to practice true freedom rather than simply being having all options, but many of these options being slaves to the individual. And I'd like to propose three ways that Islam actually helps to endorse freedom of the individual. First one, I would say, like, physically. It seems that there's three practices in particular physically that seem to be very effective. The first one being prayer, which is obviously very central to the Muslim's life. 5 times a day he performs it in, at least, and many other occasions, and not necessarily counting supplications as well. Prayer can act as a mechanism by which one can detach himself not only from this world in some ways, but to become free and to communicate with the Creator. Fasting is another important practice by which one can actually abstain from the urges that we have as a physical being and try to transcend those urges and actually try to achieve something much more on the spiritual level to free yourself from many of these constrictions that we face on a daily basis. And the third one would be charity, which is often not really understood in the correct way. But charity is actually a way in which the individual can free himself from the greed and the money that oftentimes clouds the person's judgment. People become very dependent on money. They seek it for its happiness. And charity really forces the individual to say that money isn't everything, and there are more things than money in this world. Second, I would say mentally. Um, in a way, if you think of a religious belief, it's based upon the foundation of an eternal being who is the source of truth and goodness. And if you think of it that way, one is not in a state of fluctuation between whatever kind of ideologies are going on in the world, or what kind of findings there are, or what are the historical events of the time. One can actually cling to something that is everlasting, and not only everlasting, but the most perfect and infinite being. Just it's powerful when you really think about it. How the most reliable thing that you have is the best thing, and really that kind of frees your spirit. It makes you feel as if this world is not as important. And when you're able to feel that, you really are able to advance spiritually, and as a person, you become a lot more happy because this world is very tough for many people, many disappointments, and people sometimes don't have their way. Some people don't have all of the resources, and by recognizing that this world isn't everything, people have been able to unlock themselves from many of the despair that they have faced, and try to not only do good in this world, but to hope for something better later on. And number three, intellectually. This is kind of, I guess, maybe a little less of an extent today, as education is truly a foundation of our society in many ways. Um, but I would assert that even today it can. But I would like to highlight, at least back in the history, for a moment. Keep in mind the time of the revelation of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very. There was quite a time where education was not quite available to everyone, and whatever was education was available was rather limited and kind of things that were passed down from generation to generation. Many of these things were the idols and the belief systems of the religious practices, and many of the cultural practices, such as marriage or whatever kind of clans you're in, and all these other practices as well. For other regions, you have polytheism, and you have all these other practices as well. And if you really think about it, Islam has come to unify many of these ideologies and to remove from them the impurities. And by removing the impurities, a person is able to move on from those things and to transcend into the truth. Now, if you transcend into the truth, one is able to experience true freedom. But that doesn't mean your education is done, for the truth is not so easy to learn. Right? Once you've established Islam as a way of life, it becomes the journey for truth afterward. And so I'm not going to say that once Islam has been in a person's heart, it's good. He knows every bit of truth. In reality, it's just the beginning of the journey. But the journey will become much easier, and you're given all the equipment that you need. Um, Also, intellect is not confined to observation or whatever kind of things you can see. Observation is the basis of science and materialism today. But when you're able to actually cling to things that are eternal and unseen, and probably most importantly, it provides a meaning for one's life and a connection with the source of life is the essence of freedom. If you're able to know where you came from, what you're here for, and why you should act kindly to other people, you're really able to unlock more than just happiness. It's your meaning in life, and it's truly a powerful thing.
يخادعون الله والذين آمنوا وما يخدعون إلا أنفسهم وما يشعرون